Welcome to Lieven and Marcelo's Criminology podcast, a podcast hosted by Marcelo Aevi from the University of Lausanne, Switzerland, and Lieven Pauwels from Ghent University, Belgium. We aim to draw a map of the state of criminology across Europe through the words of contemporary criminologists. How is criminology defined and taught? Which are the main lines of research? Which are the main schools of thought in each country? These and many other questions are answered here by fellow researchers who share their vision on the development of criminology in their countries from its beginnings to the second decade of the 21st century. If you want to know and compare their stories, stay tuned.
Today we are interviewing Helgi Gunnlaugsson. Helgi Gunnlaugsson is professor of sociology at the University of Iceland, where he teaches sociology of deviance. His research interests are, among others, crime perceptions, local crime trends, and the criminalization of beer. He is probably the most famous criminology professor in Iceland and often interviewed in the media. This interview was conducted on the 10th of June 2022. Okay, welcome Professor Helgi Gunnlaugsson, Professor of Sociology at the University of Iceland, where you teach Sociology of Deviance. Let me first say some words about the goal of our project. The goal is to retrace the history of criminology in each European country, and we want to try to create a collective memory. Because, countries are so very different in terms of their history of criminological thought. Some have a long history, others don't have a long history. Some countries have a large number of schools, others don't. So what we try to do is basically recreate and recover the collective memory of European criminology. So you may think, that's a daunting task, which it is, and that's why we try to interview in large countries, for example, many persons for each region. And of course, regarding the situation in Iceland, we chose you, obviously, because you are not only a famous Icelandic criminologist, but you're also a lot in the media. Whenever there's something about crime, fear of crime, people call you. So you are the face of criminology in Iceland, if I may say so, and you have a long experience. So we couldn't think of anyone else to ask you our questions about criminology in Iceland. So basically, it's a very informal conversation. But we'd like to start by asking you how you would define criminology as a science as it exists now in Iceland.
Thank you very much for inviting me to the program and for including Iceland. As for criminology in Iceland, we can say it's in its early stages as a discipline or as an independent discipline. We have scholars in Iceland who have criminology in their background, you can say, and you have criminology research, but as a discipline in universities, we don't really have any criminology. It is located within other fields, so to say. It's located within sociology, for example, here at the University of Iceland. It is located within the law school as a subject within the law school, especially in the fourth and the fifth year, as penal processes. And then within at the University of Akureyri, there's a police academy there, where you have criminology as a subject in the curriculum. So we don't really have an independent academic discipline in the field of criminology here in Iceland. But we have individuals who have studied criminology abroad, and then you also have individuals who have studied sociology or law or within the police academy in Akureyri, who have have their subject in their final theses in criminology and do criminological research. But we lack a discipline of criminology here in Iceland. So it has not yet been kind of institutionalized as a subject matter within universities,
But there are different courses like Sociology of Deviance. Are there any other courses which are given which are related to criminology?
Yes, there are several courses taught within our universities, criminology-oriented courses or criminology subjects. It's for example, I teach Introduction to Criminology in the bachelor's program. I teach another course, Social Deviance, which of course is broader than criminology, broader than crime. And we have in the law school, we have courses in penal processes. And in the master's program, I teach, for example, crime in Iceland in a comparative perspective or something like that, Iceland perspectives on crime. And we have a course also at the master's level that is focuses on the criminal justice system, and we have also kind of sociology of law course that focuses on sexual crimes. So we have kind of individual courses that students can take within the academia, but we do not really offer a degree in criminology. We do not offer a bachelor's degree in criminology. We do not offer a master's degree in criminology. But we have at the University of Iceland, we have what we call at the master's level, we offer a diploma certificate in criminology. And that's where you can take 3 courses in criminology. And it's about a year. It takes a student 1 year, 1 academic year to kind of complete these 3 courses. It's only kind of officially a half-time studies for 1 year, but you have this diploma certificate in criminology, and it is quite popular among students here in Iceland. There's quite many students who have taken this diploma in recent years. So there's this criminology diploma, but it's not a proper kind of a master's degree in criminology or a bachelor's degree in criminology. But it's a kind of short program, but very popular among students, and it is being offered within sociology. And actually, it is a very popular subject among students, And at this moment, we are actually preparing to start with a master's program in criminology starting in the fall of 2023. So it's in the early stages, and I also heard from a colleague of mine at the University of Akureyri, who is in charge of the police academy there. It's been within police officers, they get their education through the police academy at the University of Akureyri, starting in 2016. So it's been 6 years that we have police education within the university level. And he informed me just earlier this week, when I was preparing for this program, that they are starting with, or they are planning to start with a bachelor's in criminology next year. So that's in kind of preparatory stages. I don't know what will come out of it, but it will be kind of a part of police academic, police studies or the police academic studies. That you can kind of also pursue a degree as a bachelor in criminology if you're not being able to kind of actually join the police force, because not everyone can enter that discipline through that studies. It's very popular.
Popularity of criminology seems to be booming everywhere in Europe. From a historical point of view, which were the first courses that were given?
You see, when I was in the undergraduate program in sociology in the late 70s in Iceland, there was one course taught in criminology, and that was taught by a female scholar who got a degree from Oslo, Norway, and she was teaching criminology as an optional course. She was just doing it every other year, and she had an appointment elsewhere. She had a permanent position elsewhere. So this is, but when I came here around 1990, I was hired to the university to teach criminology. So that was kind of my subject, And the reason why I got the appointment to begin with, because there was an interest in broadening, criminology as a subject within sociology. It started already there, like in around 1990 when I got here.
Do you think there is a link with the developments in other Scandinavian countries, or it's a local trend?
Actually, with the Nordic countries, there is a very active and lively collaboration between scholars interested in criminology here in Iceland and the other Nordic nations, and it takes place through the Scandinavian Council for Criminology, which is a very active institutional basis for criminology. And it has really kind of helped us here in Iceland in terms of research, because the council is having kind of conferences every year, with like 50 participants, that come from all of the Nordic countries, and there was always like maybe 5 or 8 participants from Iceland. They have working groups, contact seminars. They sponsor research and grant research, and Icelandic scholars have received the research grant from this council. And this is kind of a privilege for Nordic criminology and for Nordic criminologists, to have an apparatus like that, because it really gives us a strong foundation to actually to be active in research and to collaborate with the scholars in other Nordic nations. And this is being sponsored by the justice ministries of each of these countries, and they have an office with and the secretary and the chairperson. The conference is on a rotation basis. It travels between the 5 Nordic nations, and it's very active and lively, and supports young scholars. It has a travel grants to participate in conferences, for example, European Society of Criminology, enabling young scholars to participate. So it has really kind of helped us here in Iceland, in terms of giving us an identity and strengthening, our activities. I think that's talking about the institutional basis of criminology here in Iceland. You see, it has really, the institutional basis among the Nordic nations has really helped us here in Iceland, giving the fact, that we don't really have yet, criminology as an independent discipline in the universities.
And this Scandinavian Council, from what I read, is an old institution. By old, I mean it was already there in the 60s.
Yeah, yes, it was actually, we had an anniversary conference here in Iceland in early May of this year, and where we where the focus was on both kind of the history of criminology and the contribution of criminology in the Nordic nations, and there were some publications in association with this anniversary about the impact of criminology over the years and the change in criminology over the years. And it's been a very active apparatus, and you can find it on, they have a homepage where you can actually access in the archives, you can access, research seminars and outputs, contributions there. And so you can actually go through the history through this archive on the homepage, and there you can see that this is a very lively organization, and it's been very helpful for criminology, not only in Iceland, but among the Nordic nations in particular, and it's a very interesting example, and talking about Scandinavian exceptionalism, Nordic exceptionalism. This is exceptional for sure. You cannot really debate about it. It's
yeah, and they even financed the first victimization studies, but really early.
Yes, actually they did, and they have research grants, individual research grants, but also large projects, And I was actually included in one of the projects, a recent one, public opinion and on punishment, comparing kind of the public and the judges, If there is a difference, you often think, that the courts are more lenient than the public, and actually what we did was we kind of tested it. Is it really so, by using kind of different types of methods, like population surveys, focus groups, questionnaire. So that was quite an interesting project, and it was an expensive project, employing different methods, and the main sponsor behind that project was the Scandinavian Council for Criminology, So it really helped kind of, for us to kind of advance our research there, and then actually conduct this research project. It was a major help for us, to have the assistance and the grant and the sponsorship from the Scandinavian Council.
Yeah.
So it's also interesting for young PhD students probably to get a first way of getting into contact, presenting results.
Exactly. Yeah, right. Exactly, because they have really kind of focused on young scholars to give them a platform, in presenting their research findings from their PhD studies, and also with the travel grants, and individual research grants, So it's different types of support that scholars get, from this institution or this organization. It's a really kind of positive symbol for Nordic cooperation, because the Nordic nations have an extensive cooperation in different areas, and including them criminology as well.
Could you say that there is one paradigm which is dominant, or if you would compare Iceland to the other Nordic countries who participate in the Nordic Research Council, and you see differences and similarities?
I think if I try to kind of make a kind of broad generalization, looking at like 20 years or something like that, I think Icelandic research community has been kind of very much kind of empirically oriented, and the other Nordic nations has a more maybe qualitative oriented. But this has changed in the past few years. I can see that from the Nordic nations they are increasingly being more quantitative and empirical oriented in their approach, and for Iceland we can see that also the qualitative approach has gained some foothold in the Icelandic research community. In terms of theoretical approaches, I think it is somewhat kind of mixed. I think we see kind of social process, like the social control theories, bonding theories. So it's and it's kind of symbolic interaction, like Goffman orientations, but it's I think it varies, and with the kind of the theoretical, what guides us theoretically, it's probably was kind of reflecting kind of the general approach in criminology, but in terms of methodology, I see us kind of increasingly use kind of mixed methods approach, in the sense of using both qualitative and quantitative methods, interviews and surveys, and so it is kind of eclectic in the sense, and it depends on your study object, I mean, what kind of theory, what kind of methods are applicable each time,
I was thinking that the characteristics of Iceland, and you were telling me 2/3 of the country live in Reykjavik, and it's 300,000.
Yeah, 300. Yeah, Icelanders are like 370,000, and then like 2/3 of the population live in the capital area. It's like one place, in the sense,
So I suppose that, for example, you mentioned social control theory. I mean, the kind of theories that you can use probably change a little bit, because, of course, I've been in Reykjavik and I loved it, and it's a big city, but at the same time, it's like a big town where people more or less know each other. I was surprised by this app that you have to know if there is a relationship between the persons. So I suppose that social control must be quite present there. Eh?
Yes, I think family is very important to Icelanders. Interactions take place a lot within the families, their family gatherings, I think it's even more so than we find like in Belgium or Germany or the UK, because people live so close to each other, and you tend to maintain your social ties you get early on, both with your family and your friends, So it's informal social control right there, and yes, it is true. So it's this kind of a public culture as you can find in Europe, in the sense of we have kind of open door cafes and bars where different kinds of people get together, and mingle with each other, and never really been nurtured in Iceland, because of course we have long winters, and it is dark in the winter, and cafes and bars, I mean, they came late in Iceland, it's like my research in the 1980s, maybe some of you heard about that. And I know Lieven has heard about it, with the ban on beer, prohibition of beer, which.
Yeah, but this you could explain, because not everybody knows about that.
Exactly. Exactly, because it's you see, when you don't have any beer, when it's banned, that means bars cannot really operate, And we didn't really have any bars in Iceland until in the 1980s and 90s. So kind of as a public space, and with people getting together, it was not much as a feature of public life in Iceland as it is for many other countries, In addition to that, Iceland, of course, it's the wintry temperatures and dark hours, and it kind of emphasizes the kind of the family orientation of Icelandic society, that the informal social gatherings and interactions among family members and those who you know well, but you don't really mingle too much with people you don't know. I mean, you can see, I mean, like for example in the US, people can easily have small talk, with people you don't know, But that's not really a feature of Icelandic society. You don't really speak much to strangers,
Well, I find this very interesting because just like in the other Nordic countries, you have the Vinbud.
Yeah.
So like the Systembolaget in Sweden and Vinmonopoly in Norway, which doesn't exist in Denmark. But on the other hand, there was a beer ban, but you could buy brandewine.
Yes, exactly. I mean, it's a very unusual legislation, and this was my study and my master's thesis when I did my master's in the US in the 1980s, because then there was prohibition of beer, and then of course what my research question was, of course, I mean, how come that we have such a strange legislation in Iceland, different from all the other nations, So yes, it's interesting, and to look back on it, the reason for it is that beer is, if I try to get any kind of rationality behind it, and of course I was trying to do that, there must be some sense in the ban. So I was trying to seek out the sense, and the sense was that beer is an everyday kind of social reality thing, It's a beverage that you can keep in your refrigerator. It's a beverage that you kind of use in everyday life, And but for brandewine, that's something you don't really keep in your refrigerator. That's not an everyday reality. That's something you only do on separate occasions, when you're having a big party or something like that, So people are kind of afraid of that if beer would be allowed, then kind of alcohol would become an everyday reality for Icelanders, So they were trying to kind of avoid that to happen, But of course, then there were a lot of kind of political connections to this, between urban and rural, and between women and males, and of course, Iceland, as many other Nordic nations, a kind of temperance movements have been very strong in Iceland. It's a dry culture society. It's not a wine culture, and never kind of really been a wine culture. So there's all kinds of explanations for why it is. But now I just want to point out kind of what might have been some sense in the ban is in the sense that people are afraid of that beer would become an everyday reality. And then, of course, then children are more vulnerable to start using alcohol if it was available there in the refrigerator, in the shelves, But if it was banned, of course, then you will also have maybe the strong liquor, But you keep strong liquor in a separate shelf, often with a key.
But when did this ban started? Because throughout the Middle Ages, usually beer was a way of not drinking water that was bad water. Of course, you have a lot of water in Iceland too, but
Yes.
I wonder when it happened.
Yeah, I mean, we had prohibition of all alcohol between 1915 and 1935. So prohibition was lifted in 1935 through a popular vote among the people. The majority wanted to repeal prohibition, but only by a slight majority. And then by the 35, so the prohibition was lifted, except for beer. So because there's always been kind of a strong opposition to alcoholic beverages, So it was really difficult for many in the parliament to kind of to show the defeat, that they totally be defeated. So they were able to kind of maintain the ban on beer, and they did that for this reason. They were worried about that that would be too much for Iceland in the sense of, that then alcohol would become an everyday reality for Icelanders, and we citing, research from other countries and observations from other countries about that beer is part of working day of many workers, and the harbors, and then of course the bars, and etc. And citing like reasons like that, But and then this ban of beer, it lasted till 1989, So Iceland has recently legalized beer.
But there must have been a very big black market with all the boats.
Yeah, there was illegal brewing, and there was illegal market of beer. Yes, there was. These are interesting times, and of course interesting for me as a criminologist, to study origins of substance laws, and starting with beer, and then of course I've been following the situation ever since, and then starting to study the origins of drug laws in Iceland and following the development of the drug laws in Iceland. So kind of my research interest have kind of continued to be in the area of substance use, and then especially the legislations and the attitude, public attitudes, and the government attitudes toward these issues.
Drugs is also a very interesting issue, because how does the drug arrive to Iceland? I mean,
the first drugs, they came to Iceland around 1970 or 1969, something like that. And as with many other, so it's relatively recent. Of course, we have had alcohol for centuries, and tobacco has been here for a long time too, But relatively recently, we had the drugs, And for Iceland, it was perceived as a foreign imposition, It was like an infection, It was like a bacteria coming from abroad, So there was a really firm opposition towards this invasion of these foreign substances, entering the Iceland and Icelandic mind, So there was a firm opposition that was created early on with a specialized police force and a specialist drug court, and relatively harsh sentencing, because they was perceived as a major threat to the Icelandic young, and therefore to the future of Iceland,
But you have a lot of consumption nowadays, because we discussed with colleagues, or your colleagues in Sweden, for example, and they have a problem with heroin, for example.
Yeah, with Iceland, it's you see, if you study use among young people, like adolescents, then we have the ESPAT survey,
Yeah.
For Iceland, the consumption is very low among the young, and speaking about the beer prohibition, it was justified for many years that beer is a special threat to young people. But what we see here now with beer, of course, is that fewer younger people are using alcohol. They're not using beer, and so what we have seen is that there's a reduction in the consumption of alcohol and drugs among the very young, 15, 16 year olds, But if we look at the adults, there is some consumption there, But the adult consumption of drugs, we are maybe talking about 15, 20,000 people here in Iceland using drugs, but we have maybe 180,000 using alcohol. So the volume of drug use in Iceland, probably the same in other countries, it is not really prevalent, or prominent in the whole population. It is primarily among the young, from like 16, 18 to maybe 25, 30 or 40. But then after that, you don't really see much drug use. But you're right, with hard drugs. We have a hard drug problem here in Iceland. We haven't really had heroin, but the opiate problem has been kind of severe here for us, and like, for example, the death rate has been quite high for Iceland in the past few years, like the last 5 years or so, it's not as bad as the US, but we're somewhere between the US and Europe in a sense. So yes, we've been dealing with the black market of opiates, in Iceland, especially among the young, or relatively young, So that has been a concern for all of us, We've been doing I've been doing some research on this, with my students about this addict population and the social characteristics of this population, and so once again, I always try to study this using research to kind of shed light on, well, in this case, the user population, then of course, like with legislation, and the legal change, and maybe see some signs for legal change, So I try to kind of follow up on this development here in Iceland.
Just one thing about this, because in Switzerland we have these heroin prescription programs that started in the 1990s, and so I did my PhD with that because I was in the team that was evaluating. And so the problem of we had a problem in 1990 and until 1994, and then these programs started, and there is a clear decrease. In the 1990s, we had like 400 persons dying every year for overdose, and only in inverted commas 70 per homicide. Now this the number of people that died by overdose decreased by three times less.
And do you trace it to legal changes,
Exactly, because we introduced this harm reduction approach. But I know that especially, I don't know which is the policy in Iceland, but Sweden has always been very reluctant, and even the SPAD project, who was supported by Sweden, is about the drug concern, which of course is real, but I don't know how are you, and even Sweden, even nowadays, even with the problem they have, they are quite reluctant to anything that is not repression of use, consumption.
Exactly. You see, here's one more example of kind of a research project that was sponsored by the Scandinavian Council for Criminology. This is a project that resulted in a book publication in December of last year, Retreat or Entrenchment, Drug Policies in the Nordic Countries at a Crossroads. So we have chapters there from all of the four Nordic nations. And as you point out, with Sweden, there's not much a retreat going on there. They still kind of stick to the kind of the punitive approach to the drug problem. But my chapter here in this book is on Iceland, and I actually can detect that there is some change taking place. There is some sort of a paradigm shift taking place in Iceland, especially in terms of how to deal with the addict population. There is more understanding among politicians and the public that we need to take a different approach to the addict population. So there is a lively debate about decriminalization of use for possession of drugs for personal use. So we have proposals in the parliament. They are debated in seminars. They are debated in society. And actually, you mentioned that you had this harm reduction in Switzerland. We had our first kind of consumer room opened this year, like 2 months ago or something like that. So we can see that there are kind of minor changes taking place in the sense of that, and minor possession of drugs. If you're caught with maybe one joint or something, it does not end up on a criminal record as it used to do before. So which can be harmful, to be on criminal record for like 3 years or something like that. I mean, you can jeopardize your study or work aspirations, But it's not being done for minor possession anymore. So we can see signs of a retreat when it comes to drug use and possession of drug use for personal use. But there is no retreat in the overall prohibitory nature of our drug laws, in the sense of that they still carry stiff sentencing for production, importation, and sale of drugs, and we routinely have maybe 35 or 40% of our inmate population serving time for drugs, and I did not detect any kind of change there, there is no debate about this in society, in parliament, or in the media, that we need to kind of reformulate our entire drug laws in the sense of somehow providing a more humane approach to drugs, So I don't have any sign of that sort, except for the drug user, which is new. I mean, only 10 years ago. I mean, this wasn't even among in the debate. It was. I mean, it was just carry on with the punitive approach, But it is retreating. There is some sort of a meltdown going on. So it is quite interesting, but this is, like I say, a study project sponsored by the Scandinavian Council for Criminology on the drug legislations in Nordic nations, taking kind of Yeah, it's kind of like a status report, where do they stand at the end of 2021, the Nordic nations. And we can see there's a standstill in Sweden. There's not much change going on. But in all of the other Nordic nations, Iceland included, is that there is a debate about some sort of a shift, especially in terms of the drug user, not, I guess, with manufacturing or producing or selling drugs.
Perfect. Thank you very much. That's extremely interesting. Lieven, you wanted to say something, eh?
I wanted to pick up on the idea of evaluation studies. Are there evaluation studies that prove that the policy doesn't really work? Because the punitive tendency, if you compare other research, we know that deterrence is not really the best way of dealing with crime. So that's why I was wondering if there are any evaluation studies.
Well, we kind of just follow up on developments, in the sense of not kind of formal studies or evaluation, in the sense of that now we're going to just make some sort of a research or mapping out the consequences from A to B, and what changed, why it changed, but just by following up on what has happened. And I like to kind of pay our attention to the prohibition of beer again, in the sense of, you see, beer was legalized in 1989. So the question is, what changed? The opponents of beer prior to 1989, they assumedly were protecting young people. They said, because I'm protecting young people, and I'm especially protecting working people, because beer is going to be used in working places, during working hours, and of course, consumption of alcohol will go up, So that's what the beer opponents said. So the question is, because this is like a natural experiment for Iceland. What happens with the legalization of beer? What happens with the legalization of drugs? So what happened with the legalization of beer? Well, was it a special threat to young people? No. Young people drink less today than before. Yeah, was it drinking on the workplace? No. If anything, I would say that there is less drinking in workplaces today than it was before. And then the question is there more consumption of alcohol in Iceland than in the 1980s or 70s? Yes. Consumption of alcohol has gone up in Iceland. Yes. But is it only because of beer? No. Of course, with the addition of beer, there is more consumption. But there was very little wine consumption in Iceland in the 1980s. Wine consumption has really skyrocketed, like beer, of course, in a sense. So there's more wine consumption, and of course there is beer consumption, but consumption of brennivin, you mentioned that, Lieven, brennivin, Icelandic liquor, consumption of strong alcohol has gone down. So actually, what happened with the lifting prohibition of beer, that it kind of changed the drinking pattern and the culture of alcohol towards more weaker substances away from stronger substances. And the question, of course, is there a lesson for us in terms of the drug problem? And also, what changed with when the beer was lifted, the beer ban was lifted, was that we suddenly had a lot of bars. There were no bars in Iceland before. But now there's lots and lots of bars and cafes with serving beer and wine, So there are more places where you can get alcohol. There's more accessibility to alcohol today than before. And that's, of course, part of the reason why we have more consumption of alcohol in society, is that you can have alcohol all over the place. But we still have Vínbúðin, the state liquor store, but the number of state liquor stores it's much higher than it was in the 1980s. Now we have 50 or 60 Vínbúðin in Iceland, but you only had 10 or 12 before the ban was lifted. So there's many reasons why we have more consumption. And then, of course, the question is more consumption of alcohol, is that the same as more problematic drinking?
Exactly.
I don't think so, no. I think even quite the opposite, because it's moving towards, weaker substances away from brennivin, So it appears that the drinking behavior and the pattern of drinking is more moderate than it used to be. So I think, to evaluate, the ban of beer and then the impact on society when you lifted the ban, I think that the experience is positive. in the sense. But the question, of course, is can we kind of just use this example and generalize it to the drug problem, like cannabis or something like that? Perhaps. I think I think there's a lesson there, at least for us to consider. There are some parallels, in the prohibition of beer and the prohibition of cannabis and drugs.
I was very much surprised when I went to this crime prevention conference in 2014, and then the results were shown of young adolescents who actually drank much less than in 2000. So it's indeed like a social experiment. They probably drank less than in Belgium.
Yes, it kind of also tells us, that we can use kind of soft approach or non-punitive measures to deal with a problem with like alcohol or drugs. You see, I mean, tobacco use has really gone down, but not with the help of punitive measures, but with education, and accessibility, etc. So now kind of tobacco is out, but it's socially, it's maybe through shaming or something like that, not through punitive measures, And so I think that the same thing can be done with the drug problem. It's we have other measures than just relying on the punitive, the hammer. We always have to, well, drugs are so bad for you that we're going to punish you. I mean, it's like a double punishment. First using drugs, it's harmful to you, and then you also want to add to it with some sort of a sentence or a punishment or a penalty. So it's I think with humans, we have alternatives to deal with things that are maybe not 100% pleasant.
Are there any other topics where you can say that there has been an influence by Icelandic sociologists, criminologists on policy relevant issues?
Well, first of all, I'd like to mention when I came here, when I had finished my graduate school in the US, was that I was kind of struck by that there was not much crime data in Iceland. I mean, there was not crimes known to the police. It was not published. There were no statistics from the prisons. Not from the courts, not from the prosecution office. There was a serious lack of crime data. That has changed, because you had a question about, what has changed during kind of your lifetime or your professional career. This is really stark, This is not today. I mean, criminal records, have really improved, and it actually, of course, it's professionalization of society. But I'm really happy to kind of to say, that the students from us, here at the University of Iceland, they've been very helpful in gaining this position of improved statistics on crime. So now we have for the National Crime Police Administration, for the Reykjavik Police, and then the prisons, crime data is there. But in terms of policy and crime policies, I'd like also to mention, because Iceland is a small population, and the channels between academia and politicians and society are very short. Government officials, they routinely seek for experts from the university, including me and some of my colleagues, to take part in commissions or committees, dealing with specific questions regarding crime. And I've taken part in several of these commissions in the past few years. A recent one is, for example, how to deal with the waiting line to our prisons, because our prisons are full, and there is a waiting line of convicts, that cannot really serve their time, because of that there's a stop in the system, in the sense. So the question is, how can we deal with this waiting line, convicts waiting to serve their sentence, So, and we came up with several non-punitive, non-custodial solutions to the problem. For example, increasing community service, that more convicts can actually serve their sentence through community service than actually entering the prison, and several other measures that we can, like 7 proposals that we offered, that are all non-custodial, and and the Minister of Justice, he accepted it, and he immediately started to incorporate the community service. That is to make space for more community service, So we can have an impact, definitely. And I think this is kind of characteristic of maybe a small society like Iceland, and we oftentimes are routinely we've been asked in the media about several issues, and concerning crime, drug crimes, or violence, or just name it, And another kind of issue that I'd like to mention in the sense of impact, criminologists, in quote marks, sociologists specialized in criminology, is, for example, the shift that we see in domestic violence. Especially in terms of abuse within families, focus on that as a serious issue to take seriously, because that was an issue in the late 20th century. It was not really taken seriously. It was actually something that the authorities kind of looked away from. It was like as a private issue or something, and then also with sexual crimes. We had studies about like victim-oriented studies about casting light on the difficult situation of victims to get justice within the system, with new proposals to kind of somehow meet the needs of victims, and this is in large part, this kind of debate has been informed by scholars, who have specialized in criminology subjects or sociology of law. So I can see some sort of a shift towards, to take more seriously kind of domestic violence, and criminology-oriented researchers have been played a key role, in that process, in that shift, to meet the needs of victims better than we used to do. Point to various examples of kind of input from the academic environment towards, policy issues in Iceland, and in large part, maybe it has to do with a small population, and there are small roads, short roads between academia and politicians,
And probably personal relationships must be important there.
Yeah.
If you studied with someone that then becomes and the chances are high that you have shared with this person part of your studies.
Yeah.
I saw that also some the police is also well connected with the university. You mentioned a police academy,
Yeah, the police academy, because it was moved to the academic level 6 years ago, and it is placed in the University of Akureyri, and it's a popular subject, It's quite many students who enroll and apply for, and take studies there, but the police force has not been able to kind of to hire all these people, or not all these people kind of meet all the criteria to be a police officer. So it's only part of them who have actually entered the program, and not being able to kind of be transferred to the police force. So there has been a vacuum for them there. So that's why I think they're starting with criminology. So criminals will be a subject within the police academy, because not everyone can actually join the police forces, So, but also when the ball starts rolling, I mean, it's a discipline kind of that is in its early stages, and of course they know that there's a lot of interest in criminology, and so they start to offer criminology. At least that's what they're aspiring to, to start with that next year, and. So it can easily kind of lie next to the police academy, and criminology by the side within the social sciences unit, but there is so much kind of interest in criminology here in Iceland, and I can see it, of course, in the courses that I teach here at the university. Criminology is a subject that draws attention not only from sociology students, but for psychologists, for social workers and many other disciplines, So there is high interest in it, but we have not yet, like I mentioned, is yet established criminology as an independent discipline within the university. It's kind of located within sociology and kind of police academy and the University of Akureyri, and in the law school within in the law, But we can see change in the air, in the sense of us, planning to start with criminology as a master's program next year, and Akureyri a bachelor's program in criminology. So it is probably in the next few years, it has gained more foothold, an institutional foothold or an institutional home within academia.
Both universities are in Reykjavik. No.
No. The University of Akureyri is in the northern part of Iceland. It's 350 kilometers away. It's a town of 20,000 people, and so it's a local university, and they actually offer the Polish Academy there. And so of course like I mentioned, most of the population of course live here in the capital area.
Yeah.
And so it's well, they manage somehow, to offer it, and they have a faculty there, with some background. They have foreigners there, one from the UK, and then some scholars with a sociology degree, but some specialties in criminology. So it's they have an able kind of faculty there, and starting with criminology next year, they'll probably be able to hire some more people. And that will, of course, hold for us the same here at the University of Iceland with criminology at the master's level. We'll be a better position to hire people with a criminology background. And we have a few who have actually gained their PhD from abroad, specializing in criminology. And we have people in criminal justice, some scholars from the US, and from Scandinavia. And so there is individual scholars with criminology as their kind of aspiration and their field, but we do not really have kind of criminology as an independent academic discipline within the universities yet, but we see it coming in the next few years.
I was wondering because I thought that, for example, in Slovenia, you have the University of Maribor, and they have buildings in Maribor, but they also have buildings in Ljubljana, in the capital. Because I was wondering if people want to study there, it's 300. You cannot go back and forth every day. You have to move there, or teach online. I don't know.
Pandemic was very kind of favorable to these rural universities, it's in the sense of online teaching becomes more accessible or more acceptable. So I think many of their courses are just online, but then they have maybe study periods, maybe for 1 or 2 weeks, and they might even have them here in Reykjavik, and but also at the University of Akureyri. But I think it was a blessing in a disguise for them, because and suddenly University of Iceland, which really did not rely much on online teaching before the pandemic, and then suddenly we are starting to do it, But the University of Akureyri was prepared because they had already kind of incorporated online teaching into their program, and now it's more acceptable than it was before the pandemic, because we at the University of Iceland, we said no, all academia has to be physically in a classroom, or we have to have a community, physical community of people together, and but now, we have to do both, have to have classes in the classroom, but also offer it online, so it's a different atmosphere now, and it's favorable to a university like Akureyri.
Yeah. So, but people send their papers and their thesis just online, and there is no distance anymore. But of course, you need some social capital, and I can imagine that teaching online in Reykjavik while you are working in Akureyri, sometimes you really need to visit colleagues. So, but I think, some blending will probably be the future.
Yeah, I don't like this development very much. I fear, that one day we're not going to have any students in close presence of us. I mean, I fear, that everybody will do their studies from somewhere else. And I don't think it's a positive development. But I guess probably will be parallel. We'll do both. We'll have online teaching. And then also we will have classroom participation, but probably the classroom participation will change somewhat, It'll be more kind of active teaching in the sense of kind of promoting more activity from the students than we are used to or something, So, I mean, these are kind of exciting times too, I mean, it's a challenge for all of us in academia, how to meet this new this new environment,
Yeah, I found it very difficult to activate students because there are large groups, and in some courses there are exercises, for example, statistics, and it's really difficult. People don't dare to ask questions because their name is visible when they ask a question in the chat room. So, but I guess we'll
Yes.
survive.
Yeah, that's the problem, when I do online teaching and I don't see the faces of the students, it's all black, and I even ask them, please, let me see your face at least, and they don't do it, maybe one or two or something, but then all just black faces, you don't know what they're doing. They're probably not listening, or they're not watching or whatever. They're just doing their own thing, they're probably just browsing the internet, playing
Yeah.
computer games.
Yeah, but I wonder. I mean, you never know what technology will deliver us. And so the moment they find, which I cannot imagine really, because when I was a kid, I used to watch this series called UFO, and I thought they were talking. I was born in '66, so this must be '70. I saw these people talking through the screens, and I thought, wow, that is the future. No, now we are doing this all the time, but I cannot imagine the next movement, which could be. But if they improve a little bit more the connection, then yeah, I don't know if these classes as we know them currently, if you can a little bit materialize the person, see it in 3 dimensions or something like that, then I don't know.
I just see Brave New World, Aldous Huxley. I don't like it.
Exactly. So we talk about this change that you saw with the ban of beer and also the change, the drugs that arrived. So 30 to 40% of the Icelandic population is people there for drugs. What other things changed from the time when you were studying criminology? Let's say how crime has changed during your lifespan.
When I came here to Iceland, like I mentioned earlier, there was not much crime data going on, so I was kind of trying to tap into the concerns of Icelanders. I mean, what are they most concerned about regarding crime? The crime type that Icelanders were very much concerned with, like in 1990, was the drug problem. They were really much concerned about drugs, to kind of help the police, and the help in arresting, drug smugglers, and the sale of drugs, because this is poison, poisoning our people. So there was that. So the drug problem was perceived as problem number one, but that has changed a little bit over the years. Drugs, of course, gradually becoming part of everyday reality for some people, and so I can see that there is some softening in terms of the seriousness of the drug problem. It has changed somewhat, but we have other types of crime entering the picture. It is the concern with sexual crimes and kind of domestic crimes. I can see that today, it's sexual crimes in terms of of course, incest, and sexual victimization of children, but also this sexual victimization in general. I can see that as a major concern in Iceland today, which it was not at the time, when I entered the picture, not as much as it was. It was people kind of looking away from it, some victim blaming going on, and stereotypes of the victim, etc. But that has kind of changed radically, in the past few years, and was intensified by the Me Too confessions, in terms of focusing on sexual crimes, and especially on the victim, and but the offender is kind of in the shadow, So there's a lot of kind of sympathy for the victim, but there's a lot of condemnation for the offender, and the sentiment has been kind of punitive, in the sense of, that there is sentencing is lenient in sexual crimes, and but maybe sentencing is not the most problem, but more in terms of, crime processing, and many of these cases are being dropped, and the reluctance of victims to report it, So this is kind of I'm just kind of touching up on the dialogue here in Iceland, So there's kind of shifted from kind of this the drug problem early on, Of course, there is concern with the drugs, but it's a little bit different than it was in 1990, Then it was a kind of foreign imposition, and we need to be very firm, and then use the punitive model to kind of contain drugs, But that has kind of subdued, it has diminished, that kind of concern. Now it's a little bit different with the health perspective stepping in, more than kind of the punitive paradigm. But kind of these domestic crimes and the sexual crimes have entered the picture much more. And then we can also mention with the police, how the police is approaching crime, and when they have press meetings talking about crime in Iceland, they are very much concerned about, and maybe it doesn't surprise you much, it's about organized crime, international crime cartels, and that crime is becoming more complex, complicated in Iceland because no boundaries, and Icelandic criminals or offenders, they are in association with international crime cartels, and the topic of organized crime with no national boundaries, domestic violence, and then of course the drug crimes. I mean, I don't think this is very much different from your countries, I'm pretty sure you can see the same echoing in terms of, that sexual crimes are more in the picture now than because maybe 20 or 30 years ago, and of course fueled by the Me Too movement, and of course the same with maybe drug crimes, how they were perceived in the 70s in your countries, is probably also with that kind of, because this was new for all of us, and so we want to react firmly, and then that is kind of somewhat diminished, and we're looking for alternatives to deal with it, and maybe just accept it, because we are not going to be able to take the bacteria away, like I'm sure in Iceland in like the 70s or 80s, we wanted to deal with it in that sense, that next year we're not going to have any drugs in society, and actually it was a political slogan in the late 1990s, drug-free Iceland by 2000, But I think people are more realistic now, that the bacteria is here, and you're not going to be able to eradicate it totally, but we need to kind of control it maybe and somehow manage it somehow.
I was surprised also, but when I was in Reykjavik, I was there. I work a lot with Rannveig Storisdottir for the European
for the European source book, exactly.
Exactly, and I was surprised by the use of social media by the police, how they communicate information through the social media, and there is like everyone was somehow connected there.
It is interesting, because the police is trying to kind of access the public more directly, that the public can actually use social media to contact the police, and then also the police can kind of show maybe some sort of an insight to their work, but also kind of a positive image of the police, it is kind of like a community policing, and in a small society, you want to integrate everybody, that the police is there for you to help you, it's not there to kind of harass you. It's been kind of, it's interesting, and in many ways it's been a successful, but also it has had also some criticisms, that because this is, you do it live on the spot, and maybe sometimes the police is reporting something that they maybe should not have done, or like for example, during the pandemic, the Minister of Finance, he was at a gathering during Christmas, it was and there were like 50 people together, but there was only like 20 or 25 people allowed to be together, but they were 50 there, and he was caught there, and it was just through immediate kind of social media of police, that they kind of reported in their diary, and it was immediately it was out in the media, and so this kind of, when you have this online connection with the people at all times, I mean, sometimes you say something that you maybe regret, or something.
Also, I discussed with the people that were working with cybercrime, and that was interesting because they can cut all the incoming messages from some addresses. You can simply cut them because they all come through. I mean, it's an Iceland. It's an island, Iceland. So the way you can control if there is a cyber attack is quite different from the rest of Europe. I was surprised, and they were also announcing there is a virus like this, do not. And then when they identify the IPs, then they can cut it.
Yeah, that's kind of maybe one of the benefits of being in an island and a small population. You can control this, and this is actually what we thought with drugs. We thought kind of that being separate from everybody else and an island kind of far away from the rest of Europe, and that we will be able to kind of somehow build a wall between, and eradicate Iceland with drugs. But we haven't. That's not possible because I mean, there online communications, the frequent traveling of everybody, I mean, Iceland, they travel a lot, and of course we have tourists in the millions coming every year to Iceland. So Iceland is much more also open, to the international world than it used to be. That's another kind of major shift and change that I see in the last 30 years or so in my lifetime, in the sense of, and Iceland used to be a little bit more closed and away from the international community back then, But today, I mean, it's Icelanders frequently travel abroad, which they did not do, in the 1960s or 70s or even 80s, but now they frequently travel abroad. And then, of course, we have influx of tourists, coming here, I mean, it's in the millions. We only had maybe 20 or 30 years ago, we had 50 or 100,000 people visiting Iceland, but now we have 2 million, So it's a huge change and also for a small population like Iceland, because only 370,000, but we have 2 million visitors each year. So Iceland is becoming kind of a much more part of the international community as it used to be. So we are not isolated island anymore, as we used to be, a little bit more.
It's quite incredible, but I see no impact on property crime. For example, we did not discuss property crime.
No. That was the largest crime category when I came here in Iceland entering after graduate school in 1990, 1988, 1980. That was, the inmate population. It was like 25 to 35% was property crime, but it's around 10, 50% now. So what we have seen instead, and this is kind of close to what I was mentioning before here, is sexual violence and drug crimes. Now most of our inmate population is serving time for drugs and sexual crimes and violence. But property crime is lagging behind proportionately. Like thefts and burglaries, fraud, or something like that. So, and I guess that's you see the same trend in your countries.
I wonder because with the informal social control, some property crimes that are quite common could not have been very common in Iceland. Even worse before, when you didn't have tourists. Most people knew each other, so but it used to be the main crime also, like in the rest of.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. There's among young people a little bit, but also some marginalized people. It's I mean, it was like stealing, and thefts, etc. And some burglaries, but mostly maybe burglaries to kind of enterprises, companies, factories, etc. Not maybe as much, private homes, and that's also probably because Iceland, like a small population, social control of the families, etc. And you can have a better overview over your people, in a small society like that. You can accept informal social control to more degree than maybe in larger societies, because we live relatively close to each other as well. So it's a relatively small area where everybody is at.
Yeah, I remember when we were discussing the questionnaire of the source book in the first years, two particularities. For example, the Dutch were very concerned about having in the questionnaire bicycle theft. But from Finland, we didn't have Ranta still at that time. There was an issue with the stealing of boats. That was like a major issue. Yeah. So I don't know if in Iceland it's the same, and secondary houses near the coast.
No, not much. I mean, we have secondary houses, like summer houses, quite common here in Iceland, like probably like 10 or 15,000 of them, but they they tend to get more gated as they used to be. I mean, it's difficult to enter these places, and that's maybe for insurance purposes. You don't have to have maybe one or two or three incidences of burglaries and theft from summer houses. Then suddenly everybody has it gated, and it's not that expensive, anymore. I mean, to have gated this, enter a car, I mean, you're not going to be able to go through these areas anymore, as it used to be, 20 or 30 years ago. You could drive through all these communities, the second home communities, but you cannot really do it anymore. It's a gated community. You can see that. So it's
that's
like prevention measure, but I guess also because it's relatively easy, it doesn't cost much, and you probably you're more calm, and people are not going to wander into your house while you're away, But I don't think burglaries and thefts were really a rampant phenomenon, but we had incidences of it, and they were publicized in the media, and you immediately start thinking,
But it is a quite interesting trend. Do you think it was fear of crime, or maybe a moral panic, or what?
It probably to some extent was a moral panic, but we've seen kind of moral panics in terms of, like, of course, with the drug crimes, entering of the ecstasy pill, in the late 90s, there was a huge kind of moral panic here in Iceland, and actually I studied this with my colleague, and we published some articles on it. And I mean, in a small population, I mean, we tend to have kind of moral panics. We have incidences happening. There is an crime incidents downtown or somewhere else, and we have a huge discussion about this, and the fear factor is there and everything, for maybe 1 or 2 weeks, but then it suddenly dies out, and the situation was just like before it started, So we tend to have these waves of moral panics when we have incidences that are really kind of serious, But still, I think, we haven't really had any kind of huge moral panics in the maybe the past few years. I mean, we have so many different media going on. I mean, communication society is not through one channel. I mean, the young people are on TikTok, and the older people on Facebook, and people you don't watch the same thing on TV anymore. I mean, it's a scattered individualistic society. It's also happening here in Iceland. It's probably, of course, in your countries, but it's even happening here in a small population. It's that it's becoming a little bit more individualistic. Everybody has its own interests, and you just pursue your own interest in your own time with your own social media, and now with the online, with the pandemic, this kind of has been galvanized, This becomes intensified, this kind of individualistic part of our beings.
It's a very interesting reflection, because when you mentioned at the beginning the family, I was thinking, the family also I grew up in the South, so I'm also habituated to these family gatherings. But the media, for example, like before, you would eat together, and then watching TV together was a sort of ritual, because there were a few channels, and everybody was watching the same thing. Now this is disappearing. These shared experiences are disappearing. And
exactly. So it happened in Iceland as well, So everyone has its own kind of social world, family of maybe 5 or 6. I mean, then I mean, each of these family members is has their own kind of social world, and less that everyone has in common, It is individualizing society in the sense, because we so and it's an interesting trend, and I think the pandemic just kind of intensified this development, There are so many, of course, channels, the computer games, and there's so many different types of activities going on, and it has tend to kind of somehow maybe isolate us, but at the same time, maybe changing our relationships, changing our communication and interactions, they take on a different form than before.
yeah, especially living in an island, then you can have friends. It was very difficult to have. You couldn't have had friends very far away. Now the world is your playground. I don't know. I'm not saying it's good or bad, but I'm just.
No, it's a major change, for sure.
Helgi, you mentioned a couple of times when I came to Iceland, and then you mentioned that you studied in the US. But maybe if you tell us just a quick minute about your history.
You mean my professional history, or?
Yeah, because you didn't grow up in Iceland.
Yeah, I grew up in Iceland, in Reykjavik. This is my hometown, and.
Okay, and then you came. You went to study and you came back.
Yeah, exactly. You see, I got my bachelor's degree from the University of Iceland in sociology, but then I pursued a graduate degree in the US, University of Missouri, and I got my master's degree there and my PhD. And in my master's program, that's where I studied the beer prohibition, from my advisor John F. Gallagher, who has been studying marijuana prohibition in the US. When I studied prohibition of beer, I used, of course, Gusfield, but also the literature of marijuana, there is the prohibition of marijuana in the US, And when I had completed my master's thesis, I entered the PhD in criminology. That was my specialty in the US, And my kind of PhD project was crime in Iceland from a comparative perspective. Where does Iceland belong on the criminological map, so to speak, And when I started collecting data, I was hit by that, that there was no official crime data existing. So it made it a little bit more difficult for me, to actually get this picture of crime in Iceland, because there was not much data. But I got some, but it was excerpts, it was individual members of the police or the courts had just done for themselves in handwriting or whatever, and. But then I started using other methods, for example, population surveys about the attitudes of the public towards crime. And I studied the newspapers, how they cover crime. I did interviews. I visited prisons, interviewing inmates, So it was use whatever there was there available to me, And that's how I kind of did my PhD thesis, And I finished that around 1990, And so that was kind of where I kind of came from, in the sense of my academia, and then I returned to Iceland, and a few years later I got an assistant professorship here in Iceland, a professor of sociology. But the reason they hired me, because there were other applicants as well, was criminology. I was the only one with a criminology as a specialty, and they were actually interested in having more criminology in the curriculum, So that was the edge that I had over the other candidates, were kind of maybe very similar, and with fields that were already covered here in our faculty, So they thought they would get something new with me, And they were interested in criminology, and it was actually in the description. So I immediately started teaching criminology, and of course we have students in bachelor program who are specializing in criminology, like Ranveig, for example, Ranveig, she was one of my early students there, of course, a very strong student, She did her bachelor's and her master's, from the University of Iceland, dealing with criminological subjects, And we've done some research together, in the past few years, And quite many of my students, actually are working within different kind of government agencies here in Iceland, Like, for example, the Reykjavik police, like the prison bureau, with prosecution, the state police, So I see our students. They are in different types of work dealing with criminological subjects, Within.
And you created a network.
There is a network there. Yes.
Yeah, I have read a little bit and also discussed a lot with Roberto Gatti about the development of criminology in Canada, because he knew quite well Denis Sabot and he read his biography. I didn't read it, but one of the things he did was create an association of the former students, let's say, and this allows people to gather together, and then when you have all these people working in different agencies, you could get a lot of data that would be impossible to collect. Do you have something like that, an association of criminologists or former students of criminology?
We have actually an association of scholars who are interested in the subject of criminology, but it has not been very active in the past 4 or 5 years, and it consists of lawyers who have been dealing with crime-related subjects, and of sociologists and me, who have been doing some criminological research. But just as we are speaking now, we are in the process of kind of activating it again to make it a more kind of a live apparatus, And so this association, we're going to have a meeting later this month, where we're going to have not to start this society, but to kind of relive that society, or awaken that society as a group, And this group actually is in association with the Criminalist Forening in Scandinavia, and there's a journal, Nordisk Tidskrift for Criminal Videnskap, So this Iceland society will be part of that kind of network. because this is not a new society for us. This was a society that was active a few years ago. When we were 15, 20 of us, and we met maybe twice a semester or something like that, and we always had invited someone, one of us or one of our members was giving a presentation on whatever he was doing at that time, So we met, like I say, twice a semester, for maybe 4 or 5 years. Then it kind of, for some reason or another, it kind of died out. But now we are in the process of reviving it, so to speak, So it'll be a criminology society in a sense, where we can kind of meet, and discuss our mutual interests, and what's going on in terms of crime and crime-related subjects here in Iceland and our topics, So yes, there is some sort of a network of us going on, But the important thing for all of us here in this kind of community of individual criminologists or interested criminology is this apparatus among the Nordic nations, the Scandinavian concept of criminology. That has always kind of helped us together, because they have annual research seminar meetings, they have contact groups, working groups, and always one of us in this group, tends to kind of participate in these Nordic activities. So it has kind of kept us alive in that sense, or so to speak, So yes, we are, this kind of network of scholars, local scholars, local criminologists is in a reawakening process right now, and we're going to have a meeting, like I say, later this month, where we're going to have it in a kind of email group or something where it'll be easy to access everybody, and we plan to meet like we used to do, like maybe once or twice a semester.
That's wonderful news, because these networks are the ones that continue later. But you didn't tell us the result of your PhD. Which was the tradition of Iceland finally?
You see, I located this, this is with my advisor, of course, John Galler was it located within like Marshall Clinard's, societies of little crime, for example. Yeah. He was studying Switzerland. and so we tried to kind of locate Iceland within that kind of tradition, It's a low crime society if we look at the crime statistics. But I mentioned to you, we didn't really have much statistics to rely on, So it was like that. But we have some data, like for example homicide data, and it kind of indicated that Iceland was a low crime country, And we had the prison population, was a low prison population. There was some indicators of Iceland, being part of the little crime societies, So that was one aspect of it. But then there was, the interesting thing is there's 2 dimensions of social reality. It's on the one hand we have the subjective dimension. It's the mindset of people. It's the ideas people have of crime in Iceland, and that's where I kind of detected there was a major concern for crime in Iceland. People are really worried about crime. They were worried about drugs. They were worried about violence. So that's kind of on the subjective side. We had almost like, well, maybe not a moral panic, but maybe sometimes close to being a moral panic, because people are really much worried about crime developments in Iceland, really much concerned what's happening to Iceland. This small population up in the north, foreign crime is entering Iceland, But then we had the objective dimension, and the objective dimension didn't really support these concerns, for an outsider. Exactly. Of course, I was writing this in the US, where objectively speaking, this everything is crazy, with the murder rate, and the punishment levels, and the crime nature of Iceland. So for Galler, for him it was just humorous, to look at Iceland, this paradise society. There's no crime in Iceland, of course. So for me, it was always I had to kind of convince him, yes, there is crime in Iceland. So it's interesting with the subjective and objective dimensions. Subjectively, people are really very much concerned, just like Americans. But objectively, I mean, Iceland was a paradise.
Yeah, it's very interesting that you mentioned Marshall Clinard, because I have a very particular link with him. Because if you have, of course, after what you said, you know quite well Cities with Little Crime,
Yeah,
and I think it's in page 18. There is he thanks a research assistant who helped him with the work on the ground, and this is Martin Kilias. He thanks Martin Kilias that so when Marshall Kinner went on his sabbatical to Switzerland, Martin was studying sociology, and he helped him. He made the translations to German of the questionnaires, and that was the first kind of victimization survey, and that drove Martin to criminology. So, and then Martin was my mentor later, so I have a direct link with Marshall Kinner, and also with the Nordic countries, because Flemming Valvik reacted to that book. With his book, The Myth.
Oh yeah, it was a major inspiration for me,
That I was wondering that, which is because there's no white image of Switzerland. How did it work that for you in the context?
For me, or for us, it was more or less in the sense of, if you're looking for a low crime candidate, maybe Iceland is better candidate than Switzerland. That was kind of our response, On the other hand, also, we kind of aligned with Balvik in the sense of, that of course there is some crime in Iceland, and even, because Klinert, he was addressing that, the traffic related crime, I mean, in the sense of also their deaths, traffic accidents, that's a serious problem and something to deal with, even to more extent, than the crime problem in the sense, So it's a question of where you put your priorities and what are you concerned about? Are you concerned about crime, or are you concerned about, the traffic? Well, you should be concerned about the traffic, because there are so many, casualties there, more casualties in the traffic than crime or the homicide or whatever, So in the sense of kind of, I mean, with Balvik, it was pretty much there, we were kind of that Iceland could be an ideal candidate there, more than Switzerland. But also the question is, that traditionally criminologists are so much concerned with the explanations for crime, why crime, explaining crime, but we should maybe explain, why there is little crime,
Yeah.
So to turn it around a little bit, maybe a little bit similar to Hershey, I guess, social control theory. I mean, it's not always big question about why crime, but we should also ask, why not crime? Situations where you don't have any crime, and why do we not have crime there?
It's funny because, of course, that was before my time. When I started studying criminology in 1994, that was just after that debate, but it was still there. You could feel it because Martin talked about that, and also the police forces in Switzerland were not happy with that book.
Okay.
If you say there is no crime, they cannot ask for a budget,
So. Yeah, exactly. It's like taking your task away from you,
Exactly.
Yeah, that you're not dealing with serious things, Well, this is the same, when I visited Faroe Islands a few years ago and on a study trip, and there was this police, the chief of the police, and I was kind of telling him that there's not much crime in the Faroe Islands. You haven't had a homicide in 30 years, and this place looks like a paradise, I mean, there's no graffiti, there's no littering, I mean, what do you do, I mean, there's something like that. And he was kind of angry at me. He said, I have plenty of papers here on my book, a lot of cases, I have to get in here in the evenings, and I always come here on the weekends, to go through all these files, and all these cases, So it was like similar to that, because I was like this American in Iceland, it's like Iceland, I mean, there is no crime. What are you guys up to, so I was kind of in that role, when I visited the Faroe Islands, 50,000 people there, small islands, northeast of Iceland, southeast of Iceland, and to me it looked like this is just a paradise thing, I mean, there's no crime in the society, everybody's well off, you don't have any crime. But of course we know it as sociologists and criminologists that there's always crime and there's always deviance, I mean. We know it from like Emil Durkheim, even among the saints, there is deviance and crime, and with Iceland, I mean, domestic violence, it is there, I mean, sexual crimes, and of course there is some alcohol and drug problems here, like I mentioned, the opiate problem, and then of course with organized crime, cybercrime, etc. The concern is always there, But objectively speaking, you might have some differences, But what was striking me in around 1990 was that this subjective dimension of Icelanders, this high concern with what looked to be kind of relatively little crime, through the objective dimensions. But we know there's always crime.
I know you also visited Greenland.
Yes.
How would you compare Iceland to Greenland?
It is very different, I mean, in the sense of, it's a very harsh country, physically speaking, and in terms of the transformation of the Greenland society has been very rapid, and they've been facing many problems, in kind of establishing themselves as a modern nation, and the relationship with the Danes, etc. And it is in terms of alcohol and drugs, it's the problem there is much deeper, and in terms of violence, I mean, when you look at the statistical figures there, because they have crime data there, and it's staggering to go through their data in the sense of sexual crimes, homicide, violence. It's very high. The inmate population is one of the highest in Europe, I mean, talking about small societies and small crimes or little crime. And that observation needs reservations, in the sense of, you have Greenland, a small society, but you have high crime, serious crimes. I mean, inmate population is very high. You have incest, you have sexual victimization of children, you have rapes, I mean, it's really staggering, to go through the statistics. So it's a much severe social problem in Greenland than you see in other Nordic nations. And if you compare like a Faroe Islands, it's a similar population, 50,000 people. I mean, Faroe Islands is far away from Greenland in that respect. It's a very orderly, organized society, But Greenland has been facing serious kind of social problems and crime problems, But of course, things are improving, in the sense of. But what was striking to me was, in terms of the drug problem, is that they are really. I mean, they don't really have any hard drug problem there. They only have cannabis, hashish. They are more concerned about cannabis than Icelanders are concerned about the drug problem in general. I mean, they really want to do everything to kind of control it. They are maybe like Icelanders in 1970 or 1980, in the sense of how they view cannabis. They're very much concerned about cannabis. They're more concerned about the cannabis problem than the alcohol problem, because the alcohol problem is really serious there. Greenland is very interesting for many reasons, and that was another project that was sponsored by the Scandinavian Council for Criminology, was this island project, studying crime in Greenland, the Faroe Islands, and Åland Islands, and Iceland. So there's a study group that we visited all these places, and we wrote a report on the situation in these islands. It was published 2 or 3 years ago.
Okay.
It's in English.
Yes, in English. Yeah.
Okay. Yes. And your PhD too. So maybe there's still a way. It sounds interesting to compare now. You should go back and make it now. 30.
Yeah, after the pandemic, yes.
Yeah.
We will apply for a grant.
It was really nice discussing with you and all these topics. When you have the time to discuss, this connection with cleaner and valving, things that you can only see when you discuss a little bit without looking at the clock all the time. So I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, so I hope you'll be able to use this, in your live into your podcast. You maybe cut a little bit or something. I don't know how you manage with it, but hopefully this is comprehensible or understandable to the listeners.
Absolutely.
It's extremely interesting, Helgi. Really.
Okay, thank you very much. And I look forward to meeting you guys in Malaga.
Yes. Let's have a beer.
Yes, we'll have a beer together. And I'll take your advice. I will make my hotel reservation really fast. Very soon.
Perfect. Okay. See you soon, Helgi. Many thanks.
Yeah.
Bye.
Have a nice weekend. Bye bye.
Bye bye. Bye. Thank you for following Lieven and Marcelo's Criminology podcast. This podcast is edited by Eduardo Coco from the University of Lausanne. Our theme song is Seagull's Night, Noche de Gaviotas, composed by Gustavo Cantero, arranged by Tato Germano, and played by Tato and Gustavo with the voices of Sasha Conte and Alejandro Turco Gujot. Your hosts are Lieven Pauwels from Ghent University in Belgium and Marcelo Aevi from the University of Lausanne, Switzerland. Cheers and see you soon.